Late on the night of October 25, 1984, German engineer Günther Stoll suddenly jumped up from his chair at home in Anshausen and shouted, "Jetzt geht mir ein Licht auf," which means, "Now I see the light," or "I've got it now." His wife watched in bewilderment as he hastily scribbled 6 characters on a piece of paper, YOGTZE. Immediately after writing this strange word, he crossed it out, rushed outside into the night, and drove away without any explanation. This handwritten note would become the signature mystery of one of Germany's most baffling cases. YOGTZE has never been definitively decoded, despite extensive analysis by linguists, code experts, and countless amateur investigators. Some theorized it might be a license plate number, with YO possibly referring to Yugoslavia, and the remaining letters as an identifier. Others suggested it could be a radio call sign, particularly since some thought the G might actually be a 6, making it YO6TZE, which matched a Romanian radio amateur station. For weeks before that October night, Günther had been suffering from paranoia, repeatedly telling his wife that they were out to get him. But he never explained who they were or what he thought they wanted. The 34-year-old seemed to believe he was in danger from some unknown enemy. After leaving home around 11 p.m., Stoll drove to his favorite pub in Wilnsdorf. He ordered a beer, but then something strange happened. He suddenly collapsed, face first to the floor, injuring his face. Witnesses said he hadn't consumed any alcohol yet, and it appeared as if he had fainted or suffered some kind of blackout. When he came to, he muttered something about having gone away for a moment, then left the pub and disappeared into the night in his Volkswagen Golf. Therefore, what happened next remains one of the most puzzling parts of the case. Around 1 a.m., Stoll showed up at the home of an elderly woman he had known since childhood in his hometown of Heiger-Selbach. He was agitated and told her mysteriously that a terrible occurrence was about to happen and that he needed to hide. The woman, alarmed by his strange behavior, tried to convince him to either stay the night or go to his parents' house, but he refused and drove off, saying he would return home instead. This was the last normal conversation anyone had with Günther Stoll. At approximately 3 a.m. on October 26th, 2 truck drivers on the Autobahn A45 near Hagen came upon Stoll's light blue Volkswagen crashed in a ditch near an off-ramp. When they reached the car, they found Stoll inside, completely unclothed and severely injured. His clothing was later found folded neatly in the car, as if someone had carefully removed it. Remarkably, Stoll was still conscious and managed to speak to the truck drivers. He told them that 4 men had been with him in the car and had beaten him up before running away. When asked if these were his friends, he reportedly answered, no. He soon lost consciousness and passed away in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. The subsequent investigation revealed facts that made the case even more baffling. Medical examiners concluded that Stoll's injuries were not entirely consistent with a simple car crash. In fact, they determined he had been run over by a vehicle while already unclothed, then placed back into his own car, which was then positioned to look like an accident. Dirt on Stoll's body and the nature of his wounds indicated he had suffered trauma outside the car, on the roadway, before being put back inside. The car's damage and position also didn't match a typical high-speed crash. It seemed deliberately placed. Blood tests showed no alcohol or illegal substances in his system. A few witnesses came forward saying they had seen a hitchhiker on the highway that night, or a suspicious pickup truck near the scene that left before police arrived. The truck drivers also recalled seeing a man in a light jacket wandering near the crash site, who vanished before authorities arrived, possibly one of the 4 men Stoll had mentioned. But here's what made the case truly mysterious. Stoll's clothes showed no tears or damage, suggesting they had been removed before whatever violence occurred. This implied he may have been vulnerable or defenseless when he was harmed, and that his clothes were taken off either by himself or by someone else before the accident. Investigators pursued over 1,200 leads over the years, exploring everything from occult groups to secret military experiments. Some theorized that Stoll had dangerous enemies who finally caught up with him that night, forcing him off the road and staging his death to look like an accident. But why would they leave him alive to talk about 4 men? And what did YOGTZE mean in that context? Another theory suggested that Stoll might have stumbled onto illegal activity, perhaps smugglers using the highway for trafficking, and was eliminated as a witness. The highway was known for criminal activity, and YOGTZE might have been part of a license plate, he noticed. But there's also the possibility that YOGTZE wasn't an external clue at all, but something from Stoll's own troubled mind. His work in food engineering might have exposed him to various codes and technical terms, or he might have picked up the sequence from listening to shortwave radio broadcasts in the days after Stoll's death. His wife kept calling his mobile phone in desperation. Once, incredibly, the phone actually rang, instead of going straight to voicemail, connecting to a cell tower in the Hagen area. This suggested the phone was briefly turned on and within range, but no one ever answered. Was one of the perpetrators experimenting with it? Despite national television coverage and thousands of tips, the YOGTZE case produced no arrests. Nearly 4 decades later, it remains one of Germany's strangest unsolved mysteries. The combination of a cryptic code, paranoid warnings, and a staged accident created a puzzle so complex that even veteran investigators couldn't solve it. YOGTZE became famous in cold case circles precisely because it's so impossible to understand. Was it the key to Gunther's fate? Or just a meaningless scribble from a troubled mind? The case stands as proof that sometimes a single mysterious clue can completely confound an investigation, leaving even the most experienced detectives with more questions than answers. Hey everyone, it's here with a quick reminder to like and subscribe if you appreciate this content. On August 20th, 1966, a young boy flying a kite on Morro do Vintém Hill near Niterói, Brazil, stumbled upon a scene so bizarre that it reads like science fiction. 2 men lay side by side on their backs, dressed in formal suits and waterproof coats, with strange lead masks covering their eyes. The masks looked like lead plates cut roughly into the shape of sunglasses, but with no eye holes. They were designed to completely block vision. The 2 men were Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana, both electronics technicians and known scientific spiritualists who were interested in the paranormal. Near their bodies, investigators found an empty water bottle, a package of 2 wet towels, and most puzzling of all, a handwritten note in Portuguese. The note read like instructions for some kind of ritual. 1630, be at the specified location. 1830, ingest capsules. After effect, protect metals. Await signal mask. The note suggested the men were following a precise timeline, expecting to take some kind of substance at 6:30 p.m., then put on their lead masks while waiting for a signal. But a signal from whom? And why did they need to protect metals and shield their eyes? Therefore, investigators began piecing together the men's final day. They discovered that Manol and Miguel had told their families they were going to buy work supplies, but instead they purchased the waterproof jackets and the water bottle found at the scene. A waitress at a nearby snack bar remembered one of the men acting very nervous, constantly checking his watch as if waiting for an important appointment. The case took an even stranger turn when locals reported seeing a bright oval object hovering over the hill on the evening of the men's deaths, emitting blue rays of light. Some witnesses claimed it was a UFO, and this detail sparked wild theories about alien contact. The men's friends revealed that Miguel and Manol had been experimenting with spiritual communication and had even built a device to attempt contact with otherworldly beings. But there was another troubling detail. The two technicians had withdrawn a large sum of cash, about 3 million cruzeros, supposedly to purchase a car for their business. This money was nowhere to be found at the scene, raising the possibility that someone had lured them to the hill and robbed them. The autopsy results only deepened the mystery. Both men had died around 8:30 p.m. on August 17, 1966, the same time as the UFO sightings. But there were no obvious wounds and no definite cause of death due to delays in the investigation. Any traces of poison had deteriorated by the time proper tests could be conducted. A judge later criticized the coroners for discarding the men's internal organs too quickly, making it nearly impossible to prove if they had been given something harmful. Investigators found other strange items at the scene. Miguel's watch and wedding ring, carefully wrapped in plastic in his pocket, possibly related to the note's instruction to protect metals. There was also a piece of paper with the word BANZAI written on it, and scraps of aluminum with electrical equations in a notebook, as if the men had been working on some secret device. The investigation revealed that the men had previously conducted small explosive experiments, which supported the theory that they were genuinely attempting some kind of scientific or paranormal experiment on the hill. But investigators also learned about a friend named Elcio, who was deeply interested in UFOs and was reportedly the last person to see the pair alive. Elcio had allegedly told them about powerful psychic rays and may have instructed them to go to the hill with their lead masks. However, no charges were ever filed against Elcio or anyone else. The case file noted that some investigators suspected a third party might have been involved, perhaps someone who convinced these two men to participate in a deadly hoax. The missing money suggested robbery, but the victims' careful preparations indicated they willingly participated in whatever was planned. To this day, the lead masks case remains in Brazilian police files as unsolved. Whether it was a tragic experiment gone wrong, a calculated robbery disguised as a ritual, or something even stranger, even seasoned investigators were left completely puzzled. It's a case so mind-bending that it reads like urban legend. Two men climb a hill following mysterious instructions, put on lead masks, and lose their lives without any signs of struggle, while a UFO allegedly hovers overhead. In the weeks leading up to March 31st, 1922, something was terribly wrong at the isolated Hinterkaifeck farm in Bavaria, Germany. Andreas Gruber, the 63-year-old patriarch of the family, had begun noticing disturbing signs that someone was watching them. He found footprints in the fresh snow leading from the nearby woods directly to his farm, but crucially, there were no footprints leading back out, as if someone had walked in and simply stayed. Inside the barn, Andreas discovered more footprints and disturbed straw, but no sign of any visitor. The house keys went missing, and a strange newspaper appeared on their property that none of them had purchased. But perhaps most chilling of all, the family and their previous maid had been hearing footsteps in the attic at night. When Andreas searched, he found no one there. These incidents convinced their maid that the house was haunted, and she quit her job, fearing some unknown presence lurking above them. The Gruber family consisted of Andreas, his wife Cecilia, their widowed daughter Victoria, and Victoria's two young children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Josef. They had recently hired a new maid, Maria Baumgartner, who arrived on March 31st, 1922. Tragically, it would be her first and last day at Hinterkaifeck. On the night of March 31st, something drew the adult family members out to the barn one by one, where someone was waiting for them. The evidence suggests each victim was led to the barn and attacked with a farming tool called a mattock, a type of pickaxe used for digging. Andreas, his wife, Victoria, and little Cecilia were all found beaten to death in the barn. Their bodies later discovered stacked under hay. But the horror didn't end there. Inside the farmhouse, the maid Maria was found dead in her bed, and 2-year-old Joseph was found in his crib, also having met a violent end. The medical examination painted a horrifying picture of what had happened that night. The violence was so severe that investigators knew they were dealing with someone filled with rage or madness. The most disturbing detail was that 7-year-old Cecilia had not passed away immediately. Clumps of her own hair were found in her hands, which she had torn out in terror and pain before losing her life. Despite the frenzied violence, nothing in the house appeared to have been stolen. Large sums of money were left in plain sight, ruling out robbery as a motive. Therefore, investigators were faced with an even more puzzling discovery. For several days after the attacks, neighbors reported seeing smoke coming from the farmhouse chimney and noticed that the farm animals were being fed and the cows were being milked. Someone had stayed at the farm, living among the bodies and calmly taking care of the livestock. When the family failed to show up at school and church, concerned neighbors finally investigated on April 4th and discovered the gruesome scene. The investigation focused on several suspects, but the most prominent was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbor who had been romantically involved with Victoria. There were rumors that 2-year-old Josef might have been Lorenz's child, which created tension with Andreas. Adding to the suspicion, Lorenz was part of the search party that first found the bodies, and witnesses said he behaved oddly, unlocking and locking doors as if he was familiar with the farm layout. But there was a darker family secret that complicated the investigation. Andreas had previously been prosecuted for having an inappropriate relationship with his own daughter Victoria, and some whispered that little Joseph might actually have been Andreas's child, not Lorenz's. This scandal created multiple possible motives for revenge. However, police repeatedly questioned Lorenz and couldn't find conclusive evidence against him. His calm behavior could have been shock, and his familiarity with the farm was explained by his past relationship with Victoria. Other theories included roaming vagrants or military deserters, since the attacks happened not long after World War I. But the evidence of footprints in the snow and mysterious noises in the attic suggested something even more terrifying: that the attacker had been hiding on the property for days, perhaps living secretly in the attic and observing the family before systematically eliminating them. The thought of a stranger secretly living among them, listening to their daily lives before taking their lives, was truly chilling. Police found what they believed was the weapon, a mattock, hidden in the attic months later. They also discovered the family's missing house keys in the yard. Despite interviewing hundreds of people and even tearing apart floorboards looking for evidence, no definitive proof emerged against any suspect. In a desperate attempt to solve the case, authorities even removed the victims' heads during autopsies and sent them to psychics and clairvoyants for supernatural insight. These remains were later lost during World War II. meaning they could never be re-examined with modern forensic techniques. The Hinterkaifeck case remains one of Germany's most chilling unsolved crimes because it combines so many terrifying elements: the isolated location, the warning signs that went unheeded, the brutal violence, and the phantom-like perpetrator who calmly fed cattle after ending 6 lives. Even seasoned investigators called it bizarre beyond explanation, noting how nothing about it followed typical criminal patterns. The farm was eventually demolished, but the legend of the haunted farm, where someone might have been living in the attic, watching and waiting, still sends shivers down the spine of anyone who reads the case file. It remains proof that sometimes even the most experienced investigators can be completely stumped when faced with a crime that defies all logic. Hey everyone, I'm here again with a quick reminder to help me reach 1,000 subscribers. Thank you. For 7 years in the 1980s, Cindy James lived in a nightmare that seemed impossible to believe. The 44-year-old nurse from British Columbia reported over 100 incidents of terrifying harassment by an unknown tormentor. She received threatening phone calls with eerie whispers, menacing letters made from cut-and-paste words, and suffered violent physical attacks that left her bound and injured in remote locations. But in 1989, when Cindy was found deceased, hog-tied, and heavily sedated in a suburban yard, police came to a shocking conclusion. They suspected that Cindy had somehow staged the entire 7-year campaign of harassment against herself. Her family and many observers vehemently disagreed, believing she was the victim of an extraordinarily cruel and cunning stalker who finally carried out his ultimate threat. This case presents one of the most disturbing contradictions in criminal history. Was Cindy the victim of a calculating predator who made her life a living horror, or did she somehow orchestrate unbelievable attacks on herself? Even seasoned investigators were completely divided on this question. Cindy's ordeal began shortly after she separated from her husband in 1982. The harassment started with mysterious phone calls, often just eerie whispers or complete silence. Soon came threatening letters, with messages formed from words cut out of magazines and newspapers. At night, she heard prowlers outside her home. Her porch lights were smashed and phone lines were cut from the outside. But the terror escalated to truly disturbing levels. Dead cats were left in her yard with warning notes. 5 separate times over the years, Cindy was found bound or injured under bizarre circumstances that seemed to defy explanation. In one incident, a friend discovered Cindy semi-conscious in a ditch 6 miles from her home, wearing a man's work boot and glove that weren't hers, with a black nylon stocking tightly tied around her neck. She had cuts and bruises and was suffering from hypothermia, with no memory of how she got there. In another terrifying episode, her private investigator, Ozzy Caban, heard strange garbled noises over a 2-way radio he had given her for protection. Racing to her house, he found Cindy unconscious on the floor of her home, with a knife stabbed through her hand, pinning a threatening note to the floor, and a nylon stocking wrapped around her neck. She later recounted being attacked from behind, held down, injected with something, and blacking out. Each incident was like a scene from a horror film. The anonymous phone calls continued, along with cryptic notes that said things like, "Soon, Cindy." Even Cindy's beloved dog was once found shaking with a cord tied around its neck, though thankfully the animal was unharmed. But as the investigation continued over the years, police grew increasingly suspicious that there was no perpetrator at all, except possibly Cindy herself. Throughout all the harassment, extensive surveillance was placed on Cindy's house. At one point, 14 officers monitored her home for 24 hours a day. Yet incredibly, not a single incident ever occurred while police were actively watching. The threatening calls were always too short to trace and only came when she was alone. Despite 7 years of investigation, no fingerprints, DNA evidence, or solid proof of any stalker ever surfaced. Moreover, some of Cindy's own behavior raised questions. She was often evasive with the police and sometimes withheld important information. Authorities began to theorize that Cindy might be suffering from a psychological condition that caused her to stage the harassment herself. They pointed to inconsistencies in her stories and questioned how she could have been tied up in such complex ways without any sign of struggle at the scenes. Therefore, when Cindy disappeared from her home on May 25, 1989, police were prepared for another staged incident. Her car was found in a neighborhood parking lot with groceries and a wrapped gift inside, and blood on the driver's door. 2 weeks later, on June 8, 1989, her body was discovered in the yard of an abandoned house in Richmond, British Columbia. The scene was grimly similar to the previous attacks. Cindy's hands and feet were bound behind her back with what police described as a complex knot. A black nylon stocking was tightly wrapped around her neck. An autopsy found a lethal amount of morphine and other sedatives in her system, but notably, there were no needle marks on her body, suggesting the drugs may have been taken orally or administered in another way. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police reached an astonishing conclusion. They believed Cindy's death was likely self-inflicted, essentially that she had tied herself up and either intentionally or accidentally overdosed. The coroner's inquest, however, delivered an open verdict of death by unknown event, neither ruling it self-inflicted nor homicide. To Cindy's family, it seemed unthinkable that a woman would administer lethal drugs to herself and tie herself in such an elaborate, painful way. They forcefully rejected the self-inflicted theory, insisting that someone had finally carried out years of threats. The case revealed troubling details that supported both theories. Officers noted that across dozens of incidents, not a single fingerprint or witness to an attack, aside from Cindy's own reports, ever emerged. Some of the threatening notes were analyzed, and the handwriting didn't match Cindy's, but critics argued she could have disguised her writing or had someone else write them. On the other hand, Cindy's private investigator noted that phone lines were repeatedly cut from outside the house, and the silent caller would only speak when Cindy alone answered the phone, never when others picked up, suggesting a real stalker's caution. Perhaps most chilling, Cindy told multiple people, including her parents and investigators, that her attacker had threatened that if she revealed too much, her family would be harmed. This, she said, was why she often kept details to herself. Cindy's mother believed her daughter knew who the perpetrator was, but kept it secret out of fear, a secret she took to her grave. The Cindy James case remains completely unsolved because it presents two utterly opposing narratives, each seeming impossible to believe. If Cindy staged everything herself, it's nearly inconceivable how she managed to bind herself so tightly and take lethal drugs without leaving typical evidence, all while evading constant police surveillance for 7 years. But if someone was truly tormenting her, it's equally baffling that this person managed to elude capture despite mounting a terror campaign under intense investigation, causing police to suspect the victim instead of finding the real perpetrator. Today, the official position is essentially unsolved, cause unknown. The case has been re-examined in books and documentaries, with each investigator coming away amazed at how implausible every explanation seems. What's certain is that Cindy James experienced something that appeared to be a real-life horror story, whether inflicted by an unknown enemy or by forces within her own mind. It remains one of the most disturbing and puzzling cases in criminal history, a stark reminder that sometimes there are mysteries so complex that even the most experienced investigators are left with nothing but endless questions. In July 2014, a 28-year-old German tourist named Lars Mittank traveled to Bulgaria's Golden Sands resort for what should have been a relaxing beach vacation with friends. By the end of his trip, Lars would become known as the most famous missing person on YouTube after security cameras captured him fleeing an airport in sheer terror, never to be seen again. For most of his vacation, Lars appeared to be enjoying himself like any normal tourist. He spent time at the beach, experienced the nightlife, and watched soccer games. But on July 6th, while at a bar, Lars got into a fight with some other German tourists over football team rivalries. The altercation resulted in Lars being beaten up, suffering an injured jaw and a ruptured eardrum. A local doctor treated his ear injury and prescribed antibiotics, advising him not to fly due to the pressure risk from his perforated eardrum. When his friends offered to stay an extra day with him, Lars insisted they return home as scheduled. He checked into a cheap hotel near Varna Airport to rest and wait until he was cleared to fly. But that's when Lars's behavior began to change dramatically. Alone at the hotel color, he became increasingly paranoid and erratic. That night, he called his mother in Germany, whispering into the phone that he was hiding because some men were trying to harm him. He sounded terrified and asked her to cancel his credit cards immediately, claiming he saw people following him who were wearing black. Hotel security footage later showed Lars acting very strangely, pacing the halls, hiding in elevators, peering out from behind corners as if avoiding someone, and leaving and returning at odd hours after midnight. Yet the same cameras showed no one else pursuing or threatening him. Therefore, his mother began to worry that either the head injury or the antibiotic medication might be causing hallucinations. Some antibiotics can rarely cause psychological side effects, and head trauma can sometimes trigger paranoid episodes. On July 8th, Lars called his mother to say he was heading to Varna Airport to fly home. He even told her everything will be okay, possibly trying not to worry her. At the airport around 2 p.m., he visited the medical office for a final ear examination before his flight. What happened next was captured on security cameras and has been viewed millions of times online. While the airport physician was examining Lars, a construction worker entered the room. The airport was undergoing renovations at the time. According to the doctor, Lars immediately froze in panic upon seeing the worker. "I don't want to die here," Lars suddenly exclaimed, then bolted from the medical office. In that split second, he dropped his backpack, phone, wallet, and passport, everything he owned, and began running at full speed through the airport. Security cameras captured Lars sprinting through the departure hall, then out the door, across the tarmac, and scaling a high fence into a grassy field beyond the airport proper. Witnesses reported seeing him run into a sunflower field that bordered thick forests. Then he simply vanished. This entire dramatic escape took only a minute or two and was all caught on camera. It appeared as if something had utterly terrified Lars, whether a real threat or a hallucination, triggering a pure panic response that made him abandon everything and flee into the unknown. The disappearance triggered a massive search by Bulgarian police, with desperate help from Lars's family. They combed fields, forests, abandoned buildings, and even the coastline in case he had somehow made his way there. Despite extensive efforts, no trace of Lars was ever found. No clothing, no body, nothing. Sniffer dogs lost his scent on a road beyond the field where he was last seen, leading some to suspect he may have been picked up by a passing vehicle, either voluntarily or involuntarily. Over the years, there have been numerous unconfirmed sightings across Europe. Truckers reporting a disoriented man matching his description, claims of homeless individuals who might be Lars, and tips about patients in psychiatric facilities. Each lead either proved false or led nowhere. Investigators and internet researchers have developed several theories to explain Lars's behavior and disappearance. One possibility is that he suffered a psychotic break, possibly triggered by his antibiotic medication or head injury from the fight. If he became paranoid and delusional, it would explain why he believed people were pursuing him when security cameras showed none were. Under this theory, seeing the construction worker in uniform might have triggered him if he was in a paranoid state, causing him to interpret the worker as one of his imaginary pursuers. If Lars ran off while experiencing a mental health crisis, he could have become lost in the wilderness and died from exposure or an accident. However, his mother insisted he had never shown any signs of mental illness before, though sudden onset isn't impossible with head trauma or adverse drug reactions. Another theory suggests Lars truly was being threatened by people from the bar fight or others he had encountered. The Golden Sands resort area had some criminal undercurrents, and it's possible Lars had witnessed something or gotten involved in something dangerous. His request to cancel his credit cards suggested genuine fear of robbery or worse. But investigators found this theory difficult to support. If criminals were truly pursuing him, how did they manage to harm him in broad daylight at a busy airport with extensive security cameras? And why was there no evidence of their presence? There's also a remote possibility that Lars wanted to disappear voluntarily, perhaps to start a new life. However, he left behind all his belongings, including his passport and money, and was extremely close to his family. It seems unlikely he would put them through such anguish intentionally. Police professionals from both Germany and Bulgaria have called the Lars Mittank case one of the strangest they've ever encountered. He literally ran out of a secure airport, one of the last places you'd expect someone to vanish, and did so in full view of cameras, only to completely disappear afterward. The Varna airport footage has been studied in criminology courses as an example of inexplicable human behavior under extreme stress. Without evidence of foul play at the airport, investigators lean toward a mental health crisis scenario, but they remain puzzled that an adult man could survive or stay hidden for so long if he's still alive. The case remains officially open, and sightings still occasionally come in from around the world. For his family, it's an ongoing nightmare. For law enforcement, it's a reminder that even in our modern, connected world, someone can literally run off the face of the earth in broad daylight. Veteran missing person investigators note that it's extremely rare for someone with no prior psychological issues to act so dramatically and then never surface again. The case challenges the assumption that in busy, monitored areas, people simply cannot vanish without a trace. Yet Lars Mittank proved that assumption wrong, leaving behind only questions and one of the most haunting pieces of security footage ever recorded. In the early morning hours of May 14, 2008, 19-year-old Brandon Swanson was driving home from end-of-semester parties in Canby, Minnesota, when his car slid into a ditch on a rural back road. Unhurt but frustrated, he called his parents around 1:54 a.m., asking for help. What followed was a 47-minute phone conversation that ended with Brandon's panicked exclamation of, "Oh shit," and then complete silence. Brandon Swanson has never been seen or heard from again. Brandon was a responsible college student known for being level-headed and reliable. That night, he was making the familiar 30-mile drive home to Marshall after celebrating the end of classes. When his Chevy Lumina got stuck in the ditch, he remained calm and called his parents for assistance. Brandon told his parents he believed he was near the town of Lind, on a gravel road off Highway 23. His parents immediately got dressed and drove toward the location, staying on the phone with their son to coordinate the rescue. Both parties flashed their headlights, trying to spot each other, but despite being on the phone together, they couldn't see each other's vehicles. What they didn't realize at the time was that Brandon was completely wrong about his location. Phone records would later reveal that he was actually near the town of Porter, a full 25 miles away from where he thought he was. This crucial mistake would have devastating consequences. Therefore, as Brandon and his father grew frustrated at not finding each other in the dark rural roads, Brandon made a fateful decision. Around 2:30 a.m., he told his dad he was going to walk toward some lights he could see in the distance, thinking they belonged to the town of Lynn. In reality, those lights were likely from Porter or a distant farm. His father drove to a tavern parking lot in Lynn to wait, while Brandon set off across the countryside, still talking on his cell phone. For the next 47 minutes, father and son stayed connected as Brandon walked along what he described as gravel roads and field paths. During this long conversation, Brandon described his surroundings to his father. He mentioned passing fence lines and hearing the sound of rushing water nearby. At one point, he said, "Damn, that's a fence," when he bumped into one in the darkness, indicating he had briefly wandered off the road. He also mentioned hearing water and seeing fence lines on both sides of where he was walking. Then, at approximately 3:10 a.m., while Brandon was still on the line with his father, something happened. Brandon suddenly shouted, "Oh shit!" and the phone connection immediately cut to silence. Multiple attempts to call him back went straight to voicemail. That exclamation and the sudden silence have haunted everyone who has heard about this case. The next morning, when Brandon failed to return home or answer his phone, his parents reported him missing. Initially, police hesitated to take the case seriously, suggesting that a 19-year-old staying out all night wasn't unusual, and that he might simply be sleeping off a night of partying. This response frustrated and angered Brandon's parents. However, when cell phone records confirmed that Brandon's phone had pinged near Porter rather than Lind, authorities realized he was genuinely lost and in potential danger. They quickly located his abandoned car near Porter, stuck off a field approach road. The doors were open and the battery was dead, but there was no major damage to suggest a serious accident. From that point, hundreds of volunteers, search dogs, and law enforcement officers combed a 5-mile radius around the car and along the route toward where Brandon had been walking. The search teams made some crucial discoveries that deepened the mystery rather than solving it. Bloodhounds were able to trace Brandon's scent trail from his abandoned car. The dogs tracked his path northwest toward the Yellow Medicine River, then indicated that he had entered the water at one point and come out on the other side. The trail continued toward an abandoned farm, then along a gravel road to another field, where the dogs lost the scent on a farm drive about 2.5 miles from Brandon's car. The fact that the tracking dogs indicated Brandon had gone into and out of the river aligned perfectly with his phone comments about hearing water during his walk. In spring, the Yellow Medicine River was running high, cold, and fast, shallow in some spots, but deep enough to be dangerous in others. Searchers focused intensively on that river, dragging it repeatedly and searching its banks thoroughly. They reportedly found pieces of Brandon's phone or battery near the riverbank, but no other trace of him. Importantly, The search dogs did not indicate that Brandon had remained in the water. They clearly tracked him coming out and continuing on land. This created a puzzling scenario for investigators. If Brandon had fallen into the river, which could explain his sudden, "Oh shit!" exclamation, end quote. It appeared he had managed to climb out and keep going. But if that was the case, where did he go from there? And why didn't extensive land searches find any trace of him? Weeks and months of searching followed, including aerial searches, horseback patrols, all-terrain vehicles, dive teams, and cadaver dogs. Despite covering vast areas of farmland and prairie, searchers found absolutely nothing. The region was mostly open fields, with some tree groves and waterways, terrain where a body should eventually be discovered, especially when farm equipment worked the fields. Therefore, investigators have developed several theories about what might have happened to Brandon. The most likely scenario involves him falling into a creek or river when he made that final exclamation. If he slipped down a steep bank or stepped into deeper water than expected, he could have become soaked and disoriented. Since Brandon was legally blind in one eye and wore glasses, losing his glasses in the water would have made navigation extremely difficult. If he survived the initial fall but was wet and possibly injured, hypothermia could have set in quickly in the cold spring night. However, this theory raises the question of why thorough land searches never found his body, even after multiple growing seasons when farm equipment would have uncovered remains. Another possibility is that Brandon did drown, either in his initial fall or after becoming confused and re-entering the water. Bodies can become trapped in debris or washed downstream beyond initial search areas. It's possible he was swept into the larger Minnesota River nearby, which wasn't searched as extensively in the early days of the investigation. The case led to the passage of Brandon's Law in Minnesota in 2009, which requires police to take missing adult cases more seriously and follow specific procedures immediately. The law was a direct result of the initial police hesitation in Brandon's case, and investigators now regret that crucial hours were lost due to assumptions about young adults staying out late. What makes this case so extreme and baffling to investigators is how thoroughly the area was searched without finding any trace of Brandon. Every spring for years afterward, search crews returned, hoping that rising water or melting snow might reveal something, a piece of clothing, remains, anything that could provide closure. Experienced search and rescue personnel call it extraordinary to search so many square miles with dogs, boats, and ground teams and find nothing at all. It's as if Brandon vanished into thin air, with just that clipped exclamation as the only clue to what happened. The case has taken on an almost legendary quality, the disembodied "oh shit," echoing through the dark fields of Minnesota, followed by eternal silence. For Brandon's parents, having to hear that recording of their son's last words during the investigation was an unimaginable anguish. For law enforcement, the case serves as a humbling reminder that sometimes, even with phone pings, tracking dogs, and dozens of professional searchers, a person can disappear while literally talking to family members. Seasoned investigators openly admit this case keeps them awake at night, wondering how someone can call for help, guide rescuers to within miles of their location, and then vanish at the final moment with just a gasp of surprise. It remains one of the most mind-bending unsolved missing persons cases on record, demonstrating the unforgiving unpredictability of nature and circumstance, and proving that even in our connected world, people can still disappear without a trace. On February 24, 1978, 5 young men from Yuba City, California, set out for what should have been a simple evening, watching a college basketball game in Chico about 50 miles from home. Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Jackie Hewitt, Ted Weiher, and Gary Mathias were all friends who played together on a local Special Olympics basketball team. Each had mild intellectual or psychiatric conditions, but they were independent and capable. They were excited about their own tournament game the next day and planned to return home that night, but they never made it back. Instead, their car was found 4 days later on a remote mountain road, 70 miles in the opposite direction of home, abandoned in the snowy wilderness of the Plumas National Forest. What happened next would become one of the most puzzling disappearances in American history, a case so baffling that investigators dubbed it America's Dyatlov Pass. The discovery of their turquoise 1969 Mercury Montego raised immediate questions. The car was found unlocked, with a window rolled down, sitting on an unpaved forest road at 4,400-foot elevation. Strangely, it wasn't stuck in the snow, despite being right at the snow line. When forest rangers tested it, the car had fuel in the tank and started immediately. Maps, snack wrappers from after the game, and basketball programs lay inside, confirming it was definitely their vehicle. But here's what made investigators scratch their heads. The car's underside showed no dents or scrapes, even though it had traveled a very rough mountain road. This suggested either an extremely careful driver or someone familiar with the route. The families found this impossible to believe. Only Jack Madruga ever drove that car and was very protective of it. None of the 5 men knew this mountain area at all. In fact, Madruga hated cold weather and had zero interest in wilderness areas. Therefore, authorities faced a crucial question. Why would 5 men drive into snowy mountains in the dead of night, dressed only in light shirts and jackets suitable for spring weather? They had no camping gear, no extra clothing, and no logical reason to be anywhere near that isolated location. A critical witness emerged when investigators spoke to Joseph Shones, a 55-year-old man who had been on that same mountain road the night the men disappeared. Around 5:30 p.m. on February 24th, Shones's Volkswagen Beetle got stuck in snow not far from where the Mercury would later be found. While trying to free his car, he suffered a mild heart attack and had to rest inside his vehicle with the engine running for warmth. Sometime around 11 p.m., roughly when the 5 men would have passed through, Shones heard voices and saw headlights approaching. Through his pain-induced haze, he observed what appeared to be a group of people outside his car, including what he thought might be a woman with a baby, walking and talking on the road ahead in the glow of vehicle lights. Shones called out for help, but the moment he spoke, the lights were turned off and the talking stopped. Frightened and weak, he stayed in his car. A couple of hours later, he saw flashlight beams and again called for help, but the lights immediately went out, as if whoever was there deliberately avoided him. When Shones's car ran out of gas in the early morning hours, he finally gathered the strength to walk back down to a lodge for assistance. On his way, he passed the empty Mercury abandoned in the middle of the road, about 50 meters from where his own car had been stuck. Shones's account was mind-boggling. If accurate, it meant the 5 men had been right there that night, and for some unknown reason had avoided helping a stranger in distress. His mention of possibly seeing 2 sets of headlights raised the disturbing possibility that the men had followed another vehicle up that mountain road or had met someone who led them there. The winter snow prevented extensive searches for months, but in early June 1978, after the snowmelt, motorcyclists made a horrifying discovery at a remote Forest Service trailer camp, 19 miles from the abandoned car. Inside a 60-foot unheated storage trailer, They found the remains of Ted Wire. The scene was deeply disturbing. Wire's 5-foot 11-inch frame had wasted away from his normal 200 pounds to just around 100 pounds. His beard growth indicated he had lived 8 to 13 weeks from the date of disappearance, slowly starving in that trailer. His feet were severely frostbitten, showing signs of prolonged cold exposure despite being inside a shelter. Most puzzling of all, Wire's shoes were missing, and beside the bed were Gary Mathias's sneakers. But here's what left investigators completely baffled. The trailer had everything needed for survival. Outside was a shed stocked with 36 cans of hearty meals, enough to feed all 5 men for a year. Only 31 cans had been opened. There was an additional locker with dehydrated food that hadn't been touched at all. The trailer also contained matches, paperback books, wooden furniture that could have been burned for fuel, and a large propane tank connected to a working stove. Yet no one had ever lit the stove or even made a fire, despite sub-freezing nights. It was as if Wire and whoever had been with him either didn't think to use these life-saving resources or weren't able to for some unknown reason. The idea of someone sitting in a fully stocked shelter and slowly starving to death baffled even experienced rescuers. Therefore, investigators began searching for the other 4 men. 2 days after finding Wire, search teams discovered the scattered remains of Madruga and Sterling on the mountain road leading back toward their car, about 11 miles away from the trailer. They had apparently died of hypothermia and exhaustion while trying to walk back to safety, likely within days of the disappearance. On June 7th, Jack Hewitt's remains were found about 2 miles from the trailer. He had almost made it to the shelter, but collapsed along the way. That accounted for 4 of the 5 friends. But Gary Mathias, the 5th man, was never found. Not a single trace beyond his shoes left in the trailer where Wire died. Mathias had one potential advantage. He was an Air Force veteran with some outdoor experience, though he also had schizophrenia that was controlled by medication. Crucially, his medication had been left back in the abandoned car, meaning that after a few weeks without it, he could have become severely disoriented. Searchers found 3 wool blankets and a rusted flashlight on a hillside near the trailer, suggesting someone had taken supplies and left to find help. Despite extensive searches over the years, no sign of Mathias has ever been found. To this day, he remains listed as a missing person. The investigation revealed several theories, but none that fully explained the bizarre circumstances. Some investigators wondered if the men had accidentally taken a wrong turn and, perhaps following the directions of someone they trusted, kept going deeper into the mountains. Given their trusting nature, they might have tried to help someone in distress, perhaps responding to what Joseph Shones thought was a woman with a baby. Others theorized that after getting lost, the group experienced some kind of shared confusion or poor judgment that led them to make increasingly dangerous decisions. The fact that Wire lived for up to 2 months but never used the working heater or most of the food suggested an irrational or passive state of mind that investigators couldn't explain. But here's what made the case truly extreme. Every piece of evidence seemed to contradict the others. The men had left behind personal items in their car: Madruga's half-eaten candy bar, neatly folded maps, basketball programs, nothing suggesting panic or haste. Yet something had compelled them to abandon their vehicle and walk nearly 20 miles through dangerous terrain in winter clothing. Over 40 years later, the Yuba County 5 case remains completely unsolved. The FBI was consulted but found no evidence of foul play. Yet something had clearly gone terribly wrong beyond simply getting lost. Even seasoned investigators admitted this case haunted them unlike any other. One detective said it was as if the men had just decided to walk into oblivion, which perfectly captures the chilling nature of this mystery. How do 5 men vanish into the wilderness, leaving behind a trail of inexplicable decisions and unanswered questions that even the most experienced investigators cannot solve? On September 20th, 1988, 19-year-old Tara Calico left her home in Belen, New Mexico, for her regular morning bike ride along State Road 47. She was an active, outgoing college student who biked the same 17-mile route most days, carrying her yellow Walkman and listening to her favorite music. Before leaving that morning, she even joked with her mother, "Come get me if I'm not back by noon." When Tara didn't return by lunchtime, her mother immediately sensed something was wrong and went searching along the familiar route. What she found scattered along the roadside would launch one of the most haunting missing person cases in American history. Pieces of Tara's Walkman and her cassette tape lay broken on the asphalt, as if they had been deliberately dropped or thrown from a vehicle. Witnesses later reported seeing a light-colored older pickup truck, possibly a 1950s Ford, following a female cyclist that morning. One witness said he saw the truck driving closely behind her, with what appeared to be 1 or 2 men inside. Based on these sightings and the timeline, investigators believe Tara was forcibly taken around 11:45 a.m. in broad daylight. Local police immediately treated the case as an abduction and launched an extensive search. Hundreds of volunteers combed the desert scrub around Belen, finding only bicycle tire tracks that suddenly skidded and stopped, along with possible signs of a struggle. Tara's prized neon pink Huffy mountain bike was never found. Therefore, investigators began pursuing several theories about what might have happened. Early suspicion fell on local troublemakers, and one theory suggested that 2 teenagers had accidentally hit Tara with their truck, then panicked and harmed her to cover up the accident. Some claimed there was even a cover-up involving a relative who worked as a sheriff's deputy. However, authorities could never substantiate these claims, and without a body or physical evidence, the case remained unsolved. The trail went completely cold until 9 months later, when something extraordinary happened that would make Tara's case nationally famous. In June 1989, a disturbing Polaroid photograph was discovered in the parking lot of a convenience store in Port St. Joe, Florida, over 1,500 miles from where Tara had disappeared. A customer noticed the photo on the ground where a white, windowless van had been parked. The image showed a teenage girl and a younger boy lying on what appeared to be a sheet or blanket, their hands tied behind them and their mouths covered with duct tape. Both appeared frightened and distressed. The girl in the photograph bore a striking resemblance to Tara Calico. She had the same hair color and style, similar facial features, and appeared to be the right age. Most remarkably, what looked like an old scar was visible on her leg, in the same location where Tara had a scar from a childhood car accident. Next to her in the photo was a paperback book, My Sweet Audrina by V.C. Andrews, which was reportedly one of Tara's favorite novels. The boy in the photograph was initially thought to resemble Michael Henley, a 9-year-old who had disappeared during a New Mexico camping trip months before Tara vanished. Tragically, Michael's remains were later found in 1990 in the Zuni Mountains, where he had died of exposure, unrelated to the photograph. Forensic analysis of the Polaroid produced conflicting results. Scotland Yard concluded the woman in the photo was probably Tara, while the FBI stated they were unable to make a determination. Tara's parents were convinced it was absolutely their daughter. Her mother specifically pointed to the leg scar that was visible in the image. The existence of this photograph suggested something truly horrifying. That Tara might have been kept alive for months after her abduction and transported across the country. The image implied she could be the victim of a long-distance kidnapping, possibly involving human trafficking or a serial predator. The Polaroid gave even experienced FBI agents chills because of what it represented. Someone had taken the time to photograph their captives, suggesting either a cruel trophy or evidence of an organized criminal operation. Officials determined that the type of film used was only available from May 1989 onward, meaning the photo couldn't have been taken before then, nearly 8 months after Tara's disappearance. Despite roadblocks, nationwide alerts, and extensive investigation, the white van and its occupants were never located. No other similar Polaroids were ever confirmed to be connected to the case, leaving investigators with only that single haunting image and countless unanswered questions. Over the decades, numerous tips and reported sightings have come in. Claims that Tara was seen in various states, rumors about her being held in captivity, or suggestions that her body was hidden somewhere in New Mexico. None of these leads have been conclusive. In 2008, on the 20th anniversary of Tara's disappearance, the local sheriff made a public statement, saying he believed Tara had been eliminated shortly after her abduction by 2 local men who were teenagers at the time, and that others in the community knew about it and covered it up. However, without a body, confession, or solid evidence, no charges were ever filed. The case remains officially open with both the FBI and local authorities. Tara's father passed away in 2002 and her mother in 2006, both never knowing what happened to their daughter. Investigators who worked the case over the years admit it continues to haunt them. One seasoned officer said, "We have a photograph that might show her alive and suffering, but we can't even prove it's her or use it to find her. It's like having a piece of the puzzle that only makes the mystery bigger." The Tara Calico case endures because it combines so many disturbing elements that seem almost impossible to believe. A brazen daylight abduction on a public road with minimal evidence is unusual enough. But the addition of that uncanny Polaroid, found 1,500 miles away, showing what might be the victim bound and terrified, elevates it to something that seems like fiction, but is all too real. Multiple sheriffs and FBI agents over the years have chased leads from New Mexico to Florida and beyond. In the 1990s, 2 other Polaroids showing bound girls were found in South Carolina, but these were determined not to be connected to Tara's case. In 2013, investigators tested DNA from the original Polaroid, but results were inconclusive due to contamination from years of handling. What makes this case so extreme is that it starkly poses a question that haunts anyone who learns about it. What kind of person takes a smiling, active young woman off her bicycle on a sunny morning and possibly turns her into the desperate, bound figure in that photograph? Even seasoned investigators find themselves both baffled and deeply disturbed by this case. It represents every parent's worst nightmare. A child who vanishes in broad daylight, leaving behind only broken belongings and a single photograph that raises more terrifying questions than it answers. Over 35 years later, Tara Calico's disappearance remains one of the most haunting unsolved cases in American history. It serves as a stark reminder that sometimes the evidence we find can be more terrifying than having no evidence at all, and that even the most experienced investigators can be left speechless by mysteries that seem to have no